The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Golden, Colorado, as Vivian Jones clutched her small valise with trembling hands. The year was 1875, and after a grueling 3-week journey from Philadelphia, she had finally arrived at her destination, a modest 2-story home on the outskirts of this bustling mining town. Now, as she sat frozen on the wooden steps leading to the front door, the reality of what she had done crashed over her like the icy waters of the nearby Clear Creek. Vivian had come west as a mail-order bride, answering an advertisement placed by Yates Xavier, a cattle rancher who needed a wife. She had exchanged a handful of letters with him over the past 6 months, and his words had painted a picture of a hardworking, decent man seeking companionship. But now that she was here, her courage had evaporated. What if he was disappointed in her? What if she couldn't adapt to this wild, untamed country? What if she had made the most terrible mistake of her 22 years? The sound of boot heels on wooden boards made her look up, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. A tall figure moved onto the porch, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist and a gun belt hung low on his hips. This was him, this was Yates Xavier, Miss Jones. His voice was deep but gentle, with the slight drawl she'd heard from the stagecoach driver and others since crossing the Mississippi. "Why, yes," she managed to say, her throat tight with fear. He moved closer, and she could see his face now tanned and weathered, with kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners as he studied her. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his features were strong and honest. A scar ran along his jawline, telling silent stories of a life lived hard. He seemed to sense her fear, for he did not rush her or demand she stand. Instead, he crouched down, bringing himself to her level. "You came all this way," he said softly. "That took courage." Vivian swallowed hard. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I reckon anyone would be." He offered her his hand, calloused and strong. "Step inside," he whispered. "You belong here now if you want to." Something in his voice, in the gentle way he spoke those words, gave Vivian the courage to place her gloved hand in his. He helped her to her feet, then picked up her valise. "It's not much," he said, gesturing to the house, "but it's clean and warm, and there's hot coffee on the stove." Vivian took a deep breath and followed him inside. The interior of the house was simple but neat. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace along one wall and a wooden table with 4 chairs near the cooking area. A corridor led to what Vivian assumed were bedrooms, and a steep staircase suggested there might be more rooms on the 2nd floor. "You must be tired from your journey," Yates said, placing her valise near the stairs. "I'll show you to your room. You can rest, freshen up." "No need to rush into anything." Vivian looked at him with surprise. "My room?" "Yes, madam. I had Mrs. Whitaker from town help me set up a proper room for you. I'll be taking the smaller room down the hall until—" He cleared his throat. "Until we decide if this arrangement is going to work for both of us." Relief washed over Vivian. In her darkest fears, she had imagined being forced into intimacy with a stranger immediately upon arrival. The fact that Yates was offering her space, time to adjust, spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. "That's very considerate," he nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "I may be a rancher, Miss Jones, but my mama taught me manners." He showed her to a small but pleasant bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot adorned with a colorful quilt. A washstand with a porcelain basin stood in one corner and a chest of drawers in another. There was even a small mirror hanging on the wall. "It's lovely," Vivian said, genuinely pleased. It was more comfortable than she had dared to hope. "I'll bring your valise up and then leave you be. Supper will be ready in about an hour if you'd care to join me." When he returned with her belongings, Vivian found her voice again. "Mr. Xavier, Yates, please." "Yates, I want you to know that I intend to be a good wife. I'm a hard worker and I can cook and clean and sew. I'm not afraid of difficult tasks." He studied her for a moment. "I believe you, Miss Jones, but like I said, there's no rush. We should get to know each other first, make sure this is right for both of us." He paused at the door, and I hope you'll call me Vivian." After he left, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling. This was not what she had expected. The man seemed reasonable, even kind. Perhaps coming to Colorado wasn't the catastrophic mistake she had feared during those moments of panic on the porch steps. She unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands in the basin, and changed into a fresh dress, her second best, saved for this occasion. Then, gathering her courage once more, she descended the stairs to join Yates for supper. The meal was simple beef stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread that Yates admitted came from the bakery in town, and apple pie for dessert. Throughout the meal, he asked gentle questions about her journey, her life in Philadelphia, and her family. He seemed genuinely interested, not merely making conversation. In turn, Vivian learned that Yates had come to Colorado 10 years earlier, at the age of 20, seeking his fortune in the gold fields. When that hadn't panned out, he'd worked as a ranch hand, saving his money until he could buy a small plot of land 3 years ago. He now ran a modest cattle operation with the help of 2 hired hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. "Why did you advertise for a wife?" Vivian asked as they finished their pie. It was a bold question, but one she needed answered. Yates set down his fork and considered her question. "Honest truth, I'm tired of being alone. I've built something here, not grand, but it's mine, but coming home to an empty house each night." He shrugged. A man wants more than that, wants someone to share his life with, to build a future with. His honesty touched her. "And why me? You must have received replies from other women." "I did, 7 to be exact," he smiled slightly. "But your letters were different. You didn't just tell me what you thought I wanted to hear. You asked questions, good ones, about the land, the town, what life was really like here. And when you wrote about your life, I could tell you were someone who faced challenges head-on." Vivian thought of the years after her father's death, helping her mother run their boarding house until consumption took her too, leaving Vivian alone at 21 with few prospects in a city where unmarried women had limited options. "I had to be practical," she said. "But I hope you don't think that means I'm cold or unfeeling." "Not for a second," Yates replied. "Takes courage to do what you did, coming out here, and hope. I respect both those qualities." Later, as Vivian prepared for bed in her new room, she reflected on the day's events. The terror she had felt sitting on those porch steps seemed distant now. Yates Xavier was not the rough, demanding man she had feared. He was thoughtful, patient, and seemed to genuinely want her to be comfortable in his home. Whether they would suit as husband and wife remained to be seen. But for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Vivian allowed herself to hope that she might have found not just security, but perhaps happiness as well, here in this frontier town so far from everything she had ever known. The next morning, Vivian awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement downstairs. She dressed quickly in a practical brown skirt and white blouse, pinning her auburn hair into a simple bun at the nape of her neck. She wanted to show Yates that she was ready to embrace her new life and responsibilities. Downstairs, she found him at the stove, frying bacon in a cast iron pan. "Good morning," she said, feeling suddenly shy. He turned, surprise evident on his face. "Good morning. I didn't expect you up so early. Thought you might want to sleep in after your long journey." "I'm an early riser," she replied, "and I'm eager to learn my way around." She moved toward the stove. "May I help with breakfast?" He stepped aside, giving her room. "Be my guest." "There's coffee in the pot, and I was planning on eggs to go with the bacon. Bread's in that tin on the counter." They worked together comfortably, Vivian cooking the eggs while Yates finished the bacon and set the table. It felt surprisingly natural, and when they sat down to eat, Vivian felt a small knot of tension unwind inside her. "I thought I might show you around the ranch today," Yates said as they ate. "If you're feeling up to it, I'd like that very much." After breakfast, they set out, Yates pointing out the barn, the corral, the chicken coop, and the small vegetable garden that he admitted needed a woman's touch. "I can grow beef on the hoof all day long," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but these plants just don't seem to take to me." "I had a small garden in Philadelphia," Vivian said. "I could certainly tend to this one." They walked to the edge of a pasture where a herd of cattle grazed, their red-brown coats gleaming in the morning sun. In the distance, two riders moved along the perimeter of the herd. "That's Hank and Charlie, my hands," Yates explained. "Good men, they bunk in that cabin over there." He pointed to a small structure about 100 yards from the main house. "It's larger than I imagined," Vivian said, taking in the expanse of the ranch. "Your letters mentioned a small operation." "It is compared to some spreads around here, but I've been lucky. Started with just a dozen head, now I'm up to nearly 100. Another good year or two, I can expand again." Pride was evident in his voice, and Vivian found herself admiring his ambition and hard work. He had built this place from nothing through perseverance and determination. As they continued their tour, one of the ranch hands approached, riding a dappled gray horse. He was a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sandy hair and a friendly face. "Morning, boss," he called as he neared. His curious gaze fell on Vivian. "Charlie, this is Miss Vivian Jones," Yates introduced. "Miss Jones, Charlie Dawson, one of my best hands." Charlie removed his hat, revealing hair matted from the brim. "Pleased to meet you, madam. We've been hearing about you for weeks now." Vivian smiled, charmed by his open friendliness. "It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Dawson. Just Charlie, madam. Nobody stands on ceremony much out here." "Charlie, would you let Hank know we'll be heading into town later today?" Yates asked. "Miss Jones needs to get settled in, and I thought it might be good for her to meet some of the townspeople." "Will do, boss." Charlie replaced his hat, nodded politely to Vivian, and rode off. "They're good boys," Yates said as they watched him go. "Charlie's been with me 3 years, Hank for 2, both orphans like me. I try to give them a fair wage and decent treatment." "It speaks well of you," Vivian said softly, "the loyalty of your men." Yates looked slightly embarrassed by the praise. "Just good business." A happy hand doesn't run off with the first cattle drive that offers an extra $1 a day. Back at the house, Vivian insisted on preparing lunch. It was a simple meal of salt pork sandwiches and cold cider, but Yates ate with obvious appreciation. "This is better than my usual midday fare," he said. "Usually just grab whatever's quick." "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Vivian hesitated, then added, "I would like to contribute, Yates, to earn my keep while we get to know each other." "You don't need to worry about that. I invited you here and you're my guest until we decide if we're suited. Nevertheless, I'm not accustomed to idleness. I would prefer to be useful." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I can understand that. Tell you what, you take a few days to get settled, and then we can talk about how you might want to contribute. The garden's yours if you want it, and I wouldn't say no to regular home-cooked meals. But don't push yourself too hard right away. Colorado's different from Philadelphia. The altitude takes some getting used to." After lunch, they rode into town in Yates's wagon. Golden was a bustling community, having transitioned from a gold rush boom town to a more stable settlement. The main street was lined with businesses: a general store, a bank, a hotel, a saloon, and various shops catering to the needs of townspeople and the surrounding ranches. Yates introduced Vivian to several people as they made their way around town. Mrs. Whitaker at the general store was a plump, friendly woman who had helped prepare Vivian's room. Mr. Finch at the bank tipped his hat politely. Dr. Warren, a surprisingly young man with spectacles, welcomed her warmly to Golden. Everywhere they went, Vivian was greeted with curiosity, but also genuine warmth. It was clear that Yates was well respected in the community, and people seemed pleased that he had found a potential wife. At the millinery shop, Vivian met Ursula Bennett, a vivacious blonde woman about her own age who immediately took to her. "Oh, thank heavens, there's another young woman in town," Ursula exclaimed. "I was beginning to think I was doomed to endless conversations about cattle prices and mining claims." Vivian laughed, finding herself drawn to Ursula's open friendliness. "I'm afraid I don't know much about either topic. Precisely why we're going to be great friends. You must come to our social on Saturday. The town hosts a gathering every other week, nothing fancy, just food and music and conversation. It's a chance for everyone to relax a bit." Vivian glanced at Yates, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd be pleased to attend," he said. As they continued their rounds, Vivian noticed the sidelong glances from some of the townspeople, particularly the women. She overheard snippets of whispered conversations, mail order bride and poor dear among them. Pay them no mind, Yates murmured, noticing her discomfort. People always talk, they'll find something new to gossip about soon enough. Their last stop was the telegraph office, where Vivian sent a brief message to her only remaining relative, an aunt in Boston, letting her know she had arrived safely in Golden. As they drove back to the ranch, the sun beginning its descent behind the mountains, Vivian felt a mix of emotions. Anxiety still lurked beneath the surface, but it was tempered now by a cautious optimism. The town seemed pleasant enough, and she had potentially made a friend in Ursula and Yates. She glanced at him as he handled the reins, his profile strong against the backdrop of the Colorado landscape. There was a steadiness about him that she found comforting. He wasn't a romantic figure from the novels she had occasionally indulged in back in Philadelphia, but there was something undeniably appealing about his quiet strength and consideration. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached the ranch, "for showing me around, introducing me to people." "It was my pleasure." He turned to look at her, a small smile playing at his lips. "How are you feeling? Still afraid?" Vivian considered the question honestly. "Less so," she admitted, "but it's all still very new." "That's fair," he nodded. "Time's the only remedy for that. But I hope you know you're welcome here, Vivian, truly welcome." The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through her chest, and for the first time since arriving in Golden, Vivian allowed herself to imagine a future here, not just surviving, but perhaps even finding happiness with this quiet, thoughtful man beside her. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Vivian awoke early each morning to help prepare breakfast, then spent the morning exploring the house and making it more of a home. Yates had given her free rein to change whatever she wished, and she took to the task with enthusiasm, rearranging furniture, hanging the few decorative items she had brought with her, and making lists of things they might purchase to make the place more comfortable. In the afternoons, she worked in the garden, pulling weeds and planning what vegetables she would plant. The growing season was different here than in Philadelphia, and she spent time learning from a book on Colorado gardening that Yates had thoughtfully purchased from the general store. Yates himself was busy with ranch work, often leaving at dawn and not returning until dusk. But he made a point of taking his midday meal with Vivian when possible, and their evening conversations grew longer and more comfortable as they learned about each other's lives and interests. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Vivian found the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "Yates, may I ask you something personal?" He turned to look at her, his expression open. "Of course." "You mentioned you were an orphan. Would you tell me about that, about your family?" A shadow passed over his face, but he nodded slowly. "Not much to tell, really. My father was a farmer in Missouri. Mother died when I was 6, childbed fever. The baby, my little sister, died too. Father did his best, but he was never the same after losing mother. When I was 12, he took sick pneumonia, didn't last the winter." "I'm so sorry," Vivian said softly. Yates shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "It was a long time ago. After Father died, I went to live with a neighbor family. They were decent folks, but had 5 children of their own. As soon as I was old enough to work, I struck out on my own, worked my way west, job by job, ended up here. And found your home," Vivian said. He looked around at the land stretching before them, his expression softening. "Yes, found my home." Vivian shared her own story, then her father's business failures that led to the opening of the boarding house, his eventual death from heart failure, the years working alongside her mother until consumption claimed her too. "We're both familiar with loss," Yates observed when she had finished. "Yes," Vivian agreed. "Perhaps that's why we both recognize the value of building something new." He looked at her then, something warm and appreciative in his gaze. "You understand," he said simply. In that moment, something shifted between them. A connection formed, based not on romantic fantasies, but on the shared experience of hardship and the determination to create something better. Saturday arrived, and with it, the town social that Ursula had mentioned. Vivian wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white trim, and arranged her hair more elaborately than usual. When she descended the stairs, Yates was waiting in the main room, dressed in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. "You look lovely," he said, a touch of awe in his voice. Vivian felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." The social was held in the community hall, a large wooden building near the church. When they arrived, it was already bustling with activity. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians was setting up in a corner. People of all ages milled about, greeting each other with the easy familiarity of a close-knit community. Ursula spotted them almost immediately and hurried over, dragging along a tall, serious-looking man. "Vivian, I'm so glad you came. This is my husband, Frederick Bennett. Frederick, this is Vivian Jones, our newest resident." Frederick Bennett inclined his head politely. "A pleasure, Miss Jones. Ursula has spoken of little else since meeting you." "Oh, hush," Ursula chided good-naturedly. "Just because there's finally another educated woman in town who doesn't bore me to tears with talk of canning and darning." Vivian laughed, charmed by Ursula's frankness. The four of them found a place to sit, and soon Ursula was introducing Vivian to a stream of townspeople. Everyone was welcoming, though Vivian noticed the same curious glances she had encountered on her first trip into town. "Pay them no mind," Ursula whispered after a particularly obvious stare from an older woman. "They're just not used to mail-order brides who look like they've stepped out of a fashion plate." "I hardly think," Vivian began, but Ursula cut her off. "Trust me, dear. Half the women in this room are envious that Yates Xavier, one of the most eligible bachelors in the county, chose you, and the other half are busy speculating on whether you'll last through the winter." "Ursula," Frederick admonished gently. "Well, it's true," Ursula insisted. "But don't worry, Vivian. I'm firmly in your corner, and more importantly, so is Yates. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Vivian glanced across the room to where Yates was deep in conversation with several other men, presumably fellow ranchers. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, caught her eye, and smiled warmly. "See," Ursula said triumphantly, "that man is smitten, mark my words." The music started, a lively fiddle tune that had people moving to clear space for dancing. Frederick extended a hand to Ursula, who took it with a dramatic sigh. "Duty calls," she said to Vivian. "My husband fancies himself a dancer. Come find me later." As the evening progressed, Vivian found herself genuinely enjoying the social. The food was delicious homemade pies, fried chicken, fresh bread, and an array of preserved vegetables and fruits. The music was spirited, and the atmosphere was one of genuine community. Yates eventually made his way back to her side, bringing her a cup of punch. "Having a good time?" "Very much so," she replied honestly. "Everyone has been so welcoming. Golden's a good town. People look out for each other here." He paused, then asked, "Would you care to dance? I'm not much of a dancer, but I can manage not to step on your toes." Vivian's heart fluttered at the invitation. "I would like that very much." Yates led her to the dance floor just as the musicians began a slower tune. He placed one hand respectfully at her waist, took her right hand in his left, and began to move with surprising grace for a man who claimed not to be much of a dancer. "You dance quite well," Vivian observed as they moved around the floor. "Had some practice at barn dances over the years," he admitted, "but it's been a while." As they danced, Vivian became increasingly aware of the physical closeness between them. The solid warmth of his hand at her waist, the gentle pressure of his fingers holding hers, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed uniquely his. It was the first time they had touched beyond the occasional brushing of hands when passing items at the table, and Vivian found the sensation both unsettling and pleasantly exciting. The dance ended too soon, and they returned to their seats. But something had changed in that brief interlude on the dance floor. A new awareness hummed between them, charged with possibilities. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations. More dancing, including an energetic reel with Frederick that left Vivian breathless with laughter, and the warm glow of community acceptance. By the time they headed home, the stars were bright in the clear Colorado sky, and Vivian felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. On the ride home, they spoke little, but it was a comfortable silence. When they reached the ranch, Yates helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for tonight," Vivian said as they walked to the house. "I had a wonderful time." "I'm glad," Yates replied. "It was good to see you enjoying yourself, getting to know people." They had reached the porch and Vivian turned to face him, suddenly nervous but determined. "Yates, I've been thinking about our arrangement." His expression grew serious. "Yes, it's been almost a week now, and I think I would like to stay to try to make this work between us." Relief and happiness flooded his face. "Are you certain? I don't want to rush you." "I'm certain," Vivian said firmly. "I've felt at home here more quickly than I expected, and I—" She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I've grown to care for you, Yates. I think we could build a good life together." Yates took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I feel the same way, Vivian. From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, I knew you were special, and these past days have only confirmed it." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Vivian didn't move, her heart pounding as his lips met hers in a tender, questioning kiss. It was brief, just a gentle press of his mouth against hers, but it sent a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I would be honored to have you as my wife, Vivian Jones." "And I would be proud to be Mrs. Yates Xavier," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They agreed to speak with Reverend Thompson the following day about performing a simple ceremony. There was no need for an elaborate wedding, just the two of them, making their promises to each other in the sight of God and a few witnesses. That night, as Vivian prepared for bed in her room, she found herself touching her lips, remembering the gentle pressure of Yates's kiss. It had been nothing like the few awkward kisses she had shared with suitors in Philadelphia. There had been a rightness to it, a sense of coming home. Yes, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, she had made the right decision in coming to Colorado. In taking a chance on a new life with a man she had known only through letters. Sometimes, the bravest choices led to the greatest happiness. The next morning dawned clear and bright, but as Vivian moved about the kitchen preparing breakfast, she felt a nervousness she hadn't expected. Last night, in the warm glow of the social and their first kiss, everything had seemed perfect. But in the harsh light of day, doubts began to creep in. What if she was rushing into this? What if Yates, despite his kindness, proved to be a different man once they were truly married? What if she failed to be the wife he expected? She was so lost in these thoughts that she didn't hear Yates enter the kitchen until he spoke. "Morning," he said, his voice gentle but uncertain. "You're up early." Vivian turned, trying to compose her features into a smile. "Good morning. I thought I'd make a proper breakfast: eggs, bacon, biscuits." Yates studied her face, and she knew he could see the worry she was trying to hide. "Vivian, what's wrong?" She set down the bowl she'd been mixing biscuit dough in, her hands suddenly shaky. "Nothing, She stopped, took a deep breath. "I'm a bit overwhelmed, I suppose. Everything is happening so quickly." He moved closer but didn't touch her, giving her the space she seemed to need. "We don't have to rush anything. If you're having second thoughts about speaking to Reverend Thompson today—" "No, it's not that," Vivian interrupted. "I do want to marry you, Yates. I'm just afraid." "Of what?" She couldn't look at him as she voiced her deepest fear. "Of disappointing you, of not being the wife you need." "Vivian," his voice was so tender that she had to meet his eyes, "you could never disappoint me. You're everything I hoped for when I wrote that advertisement, and so much more than I dared to expect." "But what if, no what ifs," he said firmly. "Marriage is a journey we take together. We'll both make mistakes. We'll both have days when we're not at our best, but we'll face those days together." The sincerity in his voice calmed the storm of anxiety within her. Yates wasn't expecting perfection, he was offering partnership. That was something Vivian could believe in, could commit to. "You're right," she said, managing a genuine smile now. "I'm being foolish." not foolish, human. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and I'd rather you tell me your fears than hide them. The simple gesture of tenderness undid her final reservations. Then let's speak to Reverend Thompson today as planned. After breakfast, they rode into town. The day had business to attend to beyond just arranging the wedding supplies to purchase, mail to collect, a shipment of seed for Vivian's garden to check on. At the general store, Mrs. Whittaker was effusive in her congratulations when they shared their news. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I told Mr. Whittaker just the other day those two are perfectly suited. Didn't I say so, Elmer?" Mr. Whittaker, a quiet man with spectacles perched on his nose, nodded noncommittally. "You might have mentioned something to that effect, dear." "Well, we must have a proper celebration, Mrs. Whittaker continued. "Nothing elaborate, of course, but the whole town will want to wish you well." "That's very kind," Vivian said, "but we were hoping for something simple. Just the ceremony with perhaps a few close friends as witnesses." "Nonsense. Yates Xavier is one of Golden's most respected citizens, and you, my dear, are a delightful addition to our community. We haven't had a wedding in nearly 6 months, and everyone loves a celebration." Yates caught Vivian's eye, a question in his gaze. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. It would be ungracious to refuse such genuine goodwill. "Perhaps a small gathering after the ceremony would be nice," she conceded. Mrs. Whittaker beamed. "Wonderful, leave everything to me. When were you thinking of having the ceremony?" "We need to speak with Reverend Thompson," Yates said, "but we were hoping for this coming Saturday." "Perfect, that gives us just enough time to prepare." Mrs. Whittaker was already making mental lists, her eyes bright with excitement. "Now, do you have a proper dress, dear?" "I brought my best dress from Philadelphia," Vivian said. "It's cream-colored with lace trim." "That sounds lovely, and flowers will need flowers. The wild roses are blooming near the creek, and Mrs. Patterson has those beautiful yellow daisies in her garden." As Mrs. Whittaker continued planning, Yates leaned close to Vivian. "We can still say no," he murmured, "if this is too much." But Vivian found herself unexpectedly touched by the town's desire to celebrate their union. "It's fine," she whispered back. "It's nice to know people care." They left the general store with promises to return later with details after speaking with Reverend Thompson. The Reverend, a kindly older man with a shock of white hair, was equally pleased by their news. "I've been hoping Yates would find someone," he said, smiling at them both. "This ranch of his is too much for one man to handle alone." "I'll still be doing the cattle work," Yates said with a chuckle. "Vivian has agreed to be my wife, not my ranch hand. Nevertheless, a home needs a woman's touch. And from what I've heard, Miss Jones has already made quite an impression on our community." They settled on a simple ceremony at 2 o'clock the following Saturday, to be held in the church with whatever friends wished to attend. Reverend Thompson would handle the announcement, ensuring that word spread through the town. As they left the church, Yates took Vivian's hand, an increasingly common gesture that still sent a pleasant thrill through her. "Are you sure you're all right with all this? It's becoming more of a public event than we planned." "I am," Vivian assured him. "It's touching how quickly they've accepted me, us." "Golden's a good place," Yates said, echoing his words from the night before. "People look out for each other here." They completed their errands, then stopped at the hotel's restaurant for lunch before heading back to the ranch. As they ate, Vivian noticed a tall, dark-haired man watching them from across the room, his gaze calculating. "Yates," she said quietly, "who is that man by the window?" "The one in the black coat," Yates glanced over, his expression hardening. "Victor Holden, owns the big spread north of town, the Circle H. We've had our differences." "What kind of differences?" "Water rights, mainly. His cattle kept accidentally wandering onto my land last summer, drinking from my creek. Had to have a few discussions about property lines." The way he said discussions suggested they had been heated. "Is he dangerous?" Yates considered the question. "Not in the way you're thinking. He's not going to pull a gun in broad daylight, but he's ambitious, wants to be the biggest rancher in the county, and he doesn't much care who he steps on to get there." As if sensing their conversation, Holden raised his glass in a mocking toast. Yates nodded curtly in acknowledgement, but didn't return the gesture. "Don't worry about Holden," Yates said, returning his attention to Vivian. "He's just sore because I wouldn't sell him my water rights last year." But Vivian couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that followed her out of the restaurant. Something in Holden's eyes had been calculating, almost predatory. She hoped Yates was right that the man wasn't a serious threat. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Despite Vivian's protests that they needed nothing special, the women of Golden took it upon themselves to ensure the wedding was a proper celebration. Mrs. Patterson offered flowers from her garden. Mrs. Whitaker organized a community dinner to follow the ceremony, and Ursula insisted on helping Vivian prepare her dress and hair. "It's not every day we get to celebrate a wedding," Ursula said as she helped Vivian try on her cream-colored dress, pinning up the hem that needed slight adjustment. "Especially one as romantic as yours. A mail-order bride who actually falls in love with her intended. It's like something from a novel," Vivian blushed. "It's hardly as dramatic as all that. Nonsense. You traveled across the country to marry a man you'd never met." "If that's not dramatic, I don't know what is." Ursula stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There, with the hem fixed and that blue ribbon we bought for your hair, you'll be the most beautiful bride Golden has seen in years." The dress was simple by Eastern standards, cream-colored cotton with lace trim at the collar and cuffs, and a modestly flared skirt. But with the adjustments Ursula suggested and the addition of the blue ribbon, it would be perfectly suitable for a frontier wedding. "Thank you, Ursula," Vivian said sincerely, "for your help and for your friendship. I never expected to find someone I could connect with so quickly here." "That's the thing about frontier towns," Ursula replied with a smile. "Friendships form fast because we need each other. Isolation is the enemy out here." On the day before the wedding, Yates surprised Vivian by announcing he'd be staying in town overnight. "It's tradition," he explained. "The groom shouldn't see the bride before the wedding. Mrs. Whitaker suggested I take a room at the hotel." "That seems unnecessary," Vivian protested. "We've been living under the same roof for over a week now, true, but not as husband and wife." He took her hands in his. "I want to do this right, Vivian. I want tomorrow to mark a true beginning for us." The earnestness in his voice touched her deeply. "All right," she agreed, "but who will stay with me at the ranch? I've never spent a night here alone." "Already arranged. Ursula has volunteered to keep you company. Frederick will drive her out this afternoon and collect her tomorrow for the ceremony." Sure enough, a few hours later, Frederick's buggy appeared on the road to the ranch, with Ursula waving enthusiastically from the passenger seat. She arrived laden with Parcel's final wedding preparations, she explained, and a bottle of cherry cordial to calm the nerves. After Yates and Frederick departed, the two women spent a pleasant evening preparing for the following day. Ursula helped Vivian arrange her hair in a trial run for the wedding style, and they laid out everything she would need for the ceremony. "Are you nervous?" Ursula asked as they sat on the porch later, watching the sunset and sipping the sweet cherry cordial. "A little," Vivian admitted. "Not about marrying Yates, I'm certain about that, but about everything that comes after." Ursula nodded understandingly. "The wedding night, you mean?" Vivian blushed deeply. "Among other things, that is, I don't have much experience with men." "Few respectable women do before marriage," Ursula assured her. "And Yates strikes me as a gentle man. He'll be patient with you." She sipped her cordial thoughtfully. "My mother gave me some advice before my wedding that I found helpful. Would you like to hear it?" "Please," Vivian said, grateful for the guidance. She said that intimacy between husband and wife is a gift, not a duty, that it should bring joy to both, not just the husband. Ursula's voice was matter-of-fact without embarrassment, and that honest communication is essential. If something is uncomfortable or frightening, say so. A good man will listen. And was Frederick understanding? Very much so. Ursula smiled softly at the memory. "Our wedding night was awkward in parts. First times usually are, but sweet, and it gets better, Vivian, much better." The frank discussion, though it made Vivian blush, also eased some of her anxiety. Ursula's practical advice and reassurance that nervousness was normal helped put things in perspective. "Thank you," Vivian said sincerely, "for being so open with me. What are friends for?" Ursula replied with a wink. "Now we should get to bed early. Tomorrow is a big day and brides should have their beauty rest." That night, in her room that would soon be their room, Vivian found it hard to sleep. Her mind kept wandering to the ceremony ahead, to the life she was choosing, to Yates himself. She thought of his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She thought of their conversations over the past days, how he listened, truly listened when she spoke. How he respected her opinions and valued her input. It wasn't the passionate romance of novels, but perhaps it was something better, a partnership founded on mutual respect and growing affection. A solid foundation on which to build a life together. With that comforting thought, Vivian finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. Saturday dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and sage. Vivian awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ursula moving about the kitchen downstairs. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the knowledge that this was her wedding day. By sunset, she would be Mrs. Yates Xavier, no longer just a mail-order bride but a true wife. "Good morning, bride-to-be," Ursula called cheerfully when Vivian descended the stairs. "I've made coffee and biscuits. We need to eat something, even if your stomach is in knots." They ate quickly, then set about the business of preparing for the ceremony. Ursula heated water for a proper bath, adding a few drops of rose water she had brought as a gift. "Every bride deserves to feel special on her wedding day," she said as she helped Vivian wash her long auburn hair. Afterward, they spent considerable time drying and styling Vivian's hair, arranging it in an elegant updo with soft tendrils framing her face, the blue ribbon woven through the braided crown. The cream-colored dress, with its newly adjusted hem and freshly pressed pleats, fit perfectly. As a final touch, Ursula pinned a small bouquet of wildflowers to the dress's bodice. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look absolutely beautiful. Yates will be speechless." Vivian turned to look in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. She had never considered herself beautiful, pleasant-looking, perhaps with her clear green eyes and regular features. But today, with her hair arranged so becomingly and a natural flush of excitement on her cheeks, she did feel beautiful. "Thank you, Ursula," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything," Ursula squeezed her hand. "You deserve this happiness, Vivian. Now let's get you to your wedding before we both start crying and ruin all our hard work." Frederick arrived promptly at 1 o'clock to drive them to town. He whistled appreciatively when he saw Vivian. "Yates is a lucky man," he said, helping her into the buggy. The drive to Golden seemed both too long and too short. Vivian's emotions fluctuated between excitement, nervousness, and a deep sense of rightness about the step she was taking. When they rounded the final bend and the church came into view, her heart gave a little leap. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside, indicating that guests had begun to arrive. "Quite a turnout," Frederick observed. "Looks like half the town is here." "Oh dear," Vivian murmured, suddenly anxious about facing so many people. "It's a compliment," Ursula assured her. "People want to share in your happiness." They pulled up beside the church, and Frederick helped both women down. Ursula straightened Vivian's dress, made a final adjustment to her hair, and handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a ribbon. "Ready?" she asked. Vivian took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." They entered through a side door into a small anteroom where Reverend Thompson was waiting. He smiled warmly at the sight of Vivian. "You look radiant, my dear," he said. Yates is already inside, looking about as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. The image made Vivian laugh, easing some of her own tension. "Is it time?" "Whenever you're ready." "The music will start when I give Mrs. Thompson the signal." Ursula gave Vivian a quick hug. "I'll go in and sit down, you'll be wonderful." She hurried into the church, leaving Vivian alone with the Reverend. "Nervous?" he asked kindly. "A bit," Vivian admitted, "but certain." "That's as it should be." Marriage is a serious commitment worthy of a few butterflies. He patted her hand. Yates is a good man, one of the best I know, and from what I've seen of you, Miss Jones, you're a perfect match for him, strong, kind, and not afraid of hard work. Thank you, Reverend. He moved to the door, gave a nod to someone inside, and a moment later the sound of a piano filled the church. That's our cue, he said, offering Vivian his arm. Shall we? The church was fuller than Vivian had expected, with familiar faces turning to watch as she entered. Mrs. Whitaker beamed from the front row, and Dr. Warren nodded approvingly. Charlie and Hank, Yates's ranch hands, stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, looking pleased but out of place, and at the front, waiting beside the altar, was Yates. He had never looked so handsome, dressed in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His normally unruly hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved meticulously. But it was the expression on his face as he saw Vivian that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, joy, and such tenderness that it made her heart swell. As she walked toward him on Reverend Thompson's arm, Vivian felt the last of her nervousness fade away. This was right. This was where she belonged. When she reached the altar, Yates took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "You're beautiful," he whispered, so only she could hear. The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Reverend Thompson spoke of the sacred covenant of marriage, of the partnership between husband and wife, and of the community's role in supporting the new union. Yates and Vivian exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and steady. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto Vivian's finger, a surprise she hadn't expected, tears welled in her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared. "Yates, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle but firm, a promise sealed before witnesses. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, the church erupted in applause. The celebration that followed at the town hall was more elaborate than Vivian had anticipated. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by nearly every household in golden fried chicken, roast beef, various vegetable dishes, and no fewer than 12 different pies. The same musicians who had played at the social provided lively tunes, and many guests danced between helpings of food. "Are you happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Yates asked as they shared a quiet moment amidst the festivities. "Very happy, Mr. Xavier," Vivian replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to when we can return home." The way his eyes darkened at her words sent a pleasant shiver through her. "So am I," he murmured. "So am I." It was nearly sunset when they finally took their leave, amid cheers and well wishes from the townspeople. Charlie and Hank had gone ahead to the ranch hours earlier to ensure everything was prepared for their return. And as Yates drove their wagon home, a comfortable silence settled between them. The ranch house looked different when they arrived. Lanterns glowed in the windows, and a wreath of flowers hung on the front door. Inside, they found the main room tidied to perfection, with a fire laid in the hearth and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses set on the table. "The boys have outdone themselves," Yates said, surprised and touched by the gesture. "We should thank them tomorrow," Vivian agreed. An awkward moment followed as they both realized they were finally alone, husband and wife in truth. Yates cleared his throat. "Would you like some wine?" "Or I could make coffee." "Wine would be nice," Vivian said, her voice soft. He poured 2 glasses, handed one to her, then raised his own. "To us," he said simply. "To our future." "To us," Vivian echoed, taking a small sip. The wine was sweet and warming, easing some of the tension that had crept in. "Vivian," Yates said, setting down his glass and taking her free hand. "I want you to know that we can take our time tonight. There's no rush." The consideration in his voice, the genuine concern for her comfort, moved Vivian deeply. This was the man she had married, thoughtful, respectful, and kind to his core. She set her own glass aside and stepped closer to him. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but I'm also your wife now. And I want to be your wife in every way." Yates's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Are you sure?" In answer, Vivian rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, putting all her newly discovered feelings into the gesture. His arms came around her, strong and sure, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more passionate than any they had shared before. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Perhaps," Vivian suggested, her cheeks flushed, "we should continue this upstairs." Yates didn't answer with words. Instead, he swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. He carried her up the stairs to what was now their bedroom, setting her gently on her feet beside the bed. What followed was a tender exploration, shy at first but growing in confidence as they discovered each other. Yates was patient and gentle, guiding Vivian through her first experience of physical love with a consideration that brought tears to her eyes. There was discomfort, as Ursula had warned there might be, but it was brief and overshadowed by the emotional connection that formed between them as they truly became husband and wife. Afterward, lying in the circle of Yates's arms, Vivian felt a profound sense of peace. This was her home now, not just the ranch or the house, but here with this man who had opened his life to her. "Vivian," Yates murmured against her hair. "My wife, my husband," she replied, the words still new and wonderful on her tongue. Outside, the Colorado night spread its star-studded canopy over the ranch. Inside, a new family had begun, founded on letters exchanged between strangers but cemented by growing love and mutual respect. As Vivian drifted toward sleep, she thought of that first day when she had sat trembling on the porch steps, afraid to enter. How far she had come since then, how much she had gained by finding the courage to step inside. Life in Golden settled into a pleasant rhythm for the newly wedded Xaviers. Vivian embraced her role as mistress of the ranch with enthusiasm and determination. She transformed the house with small touches, curtains sewn from fabric purchased at Mrs. Whittaker's store, a colorful quilt spread across their bed, flowers from her expanding garden arranged in jars on the table. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, providing fresh produce for their meals and enough extra to preserve for the coming winter. Yates watched his wife's efforts with undisguised appreciation. "You've made this place a real home," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. "I never realized how empty it was before you came." "It's our home now," Vivian replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And I love making it beautiful for us." Their relationship deepened with each passing day. The physical aspect of their marriage, initially awkward but sweet, blossomed into a passionate connection that left them both marveling at their good fortune. But it was the emotional bond forming between them that truly transformed their arrangement into a marriage of hearts as well as hands. They talked for hours in the evenings about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their opinions on everything from politics to literature. Vivian discovered that Yates, despite his limited formal education, was well-read and thoughtful, having educated himself through years of reading by lamplight after long days of ranch work. In turn, Yates found in Vivian not just a beautiful wife but an intellectual companion, someone who challenged his thinking and broadened his perspectives. 1 month after their wedding, as June gave way to July and the Colorado summer reached its full intensity, trouble arrived at the Xavier Ranch in the form of Victor Holden and 3 of his men. Vivian was alone in the house, Yates and his hands having ridden out at dawn to check on a section of fence that had reportedly been damaged. She was kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching and looked out the window to see 4 riders entering the yard. She recognized Holden immediately from their encounter at the restaurant. He sat tall in the saddle, his black coat replaced by a lightweight tan, one more suitable for summer, but his imperious bearing unchanged. The men with him looked rough, hired hands chosen for brawn rather than brains, Vivian guessed. Wiping flour from her hands, she moved to the door, her heart beating faster but her mind clear. Yates had warned her about Holden, and while she hoped this was merely a neighborly visit, instinct told her otherwise. "Good morning, Mrs. Xavier," Holden called as he dismounted. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Is your husband at home?" "I'm afraid not, Mr. Holden," Vivian replied, remaining in the doorway. He's out checking fence lines. I expect him back for the midday meal if you'd care to return then. Holden smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Actually, it's you I was hoping to speak with today. May I come in? This July sun is fierce. Warning bells rang in Vivian's mind. She had no desire to invite this man into her home, especially with his 3 rough-looking companions hovering nearby. But refusing outright might provoke him. I'm in the middle of baking, she said, a reasonable excuse to keep him outside. But you're welcome to sit in the shade of the porch. I can bring you some water or coffee if you'd like. A flash of annoyance crossed Holden's face, but he nodded. Water would be appreciated, for my men as well. Vivian fetched a pitcher of water and glasses, setting them on the small porch table before taking a seat in one of the chairs. Holden joined her, while his men remained mounted, watching silently. I'll be direct, Mrs. Xavier, Holden said after taking a long drink. I want to buy this ranch. I'm prepared to offer your husband twice what it's worth. Vivian's surprise must have shown on her face, for Holden continued quickly. I know it seems sudden, but the Circle H needs to expand. This land borders mine to the south, and it has the water access I need for my growing herd. Mr. Holden, Vivian said carefully, I appreciate your offer, but this ranch isn't for sale. Yates has built it from nothing. It's our home and our livelihood. Homes can be rebuilt, Mrs. Xavier. And with the money I'm offering, you and your husband could buy a much larger spread elsewhere, or even move back east if you prefer city life. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made Vivian's skin crawl. A refined woman like yourself must find frontier life challenging. On the contrary, I've adapted quite well, Vivian kept her voice steady. And as I said, the ranch is not for sale at any price. Holden's expression hardened. I suggest you discuss it with your husband, make him see reason. Yates and I make decisions together, Mr. Holden. And I can assure you he feels exactly as I do about our home. Does he? Holden leaned forward. Even knowing that refusing my offer could lead to difficulties? The implied threat hung in the air between them. Vivian's pulse quickened, but she refused to show fear. Are you threatening us, Mr. Holden? Not at all. He sat back, his smile returning, cold and calculating. Simply pointing out that ranching can be a precarious business. Cattle can stray, water sources can become contaminated, accidents happen. Vivian stood, her patience at an end. I think you should leave now, Mr. Holden, and I'll thank you not to return unless invited. For a moment she thought he might refuse. His eyes narrowed and his hand tightened on the water glass. Then he set the glass down deliberately and rose to his feet. As you wish, Mrs. Xavier. But the offer stands for now. Tell your husband to be sensible. This land will be part of the Circle H one way or another. With that parting threat, he returned to his horse and mounted. With a nod to his men, they rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and an atmosphere of menace behind them. Vivian stood on the porch until they disappeared from sight, then went back inside, her hands shaking slightly as reaction set in. She returned to her bread dough, kneading it with more force than necessary as she tried to process what had just happened. Holden clearly wanted their land badly enough to resort to intimidation. Would he follow through on his veiled threats? And how would Yates respond when she told him about this visit? She didn't have long to wait for an answer to the latter question. Barely an hour later, she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats and looked out to see Yates, Charlie, and Hank returning. One look at her face as she met them in the yard told Yates something was wrong. What happened? He asked, dismounting quickly and coming to her side. Victor Holden was here, Vivian said, with 3 of his men. Yates's expression darkened. Did he harm you? No, nothing like that. He wanted to buy the ranch, offered twice what it's worth, he claimed. The ranch isn't for sale, Yates said flatly. That's what I told him. He wasn't pleased. Vivian hesitated, then added, he made some thinly veiled threats about cattle straying, water becoming contaminated, accidents. Anger flashed in Yates's eyes. Did he now? It wasn't a question. Charlie and Hank exchanged worried glances. Boss, Charlie said, that fence we found cut this morning you think that was Holden's doing? Likely, Yates agreed grimly. He's escalating. What should we do? Vivian asked. For now, we stay alert. Charlie, Hank, starting tonight, I want one of you keeping watch at all times. We'll take turns, and we'll ride the property lines daily, checking for any signs of tampering. The men nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. What about the sheriff? Vivian suggested. Shouldn't we report Holden's threats? Sheriff Davis is a good man, but he needs evidence. Right now, it's just Holden's word against yours, and he's careful enough to make his threats sound like friendly warnings. Vivian frowned. So we just wait for him to do something worse. No, Yates said firmly. We protect what's ours. And we document everything, every cut fence, every suspicious incident. When we have enough evidence, we take it to the sheriff. It wasn't an ideal solution, but Vivian understood the realities of frontier justice. Without clear evidence of wrongdoing, the sheriff's hands would be tied. All right, she agreed, but promise me you'll be careful. Don't confront Holden directly. I'll be careful, Yates assured her, drawing her into a brief embrace. We've faced worse than Victor Holden. But as the days passed, it became clear that Holden wasn't going to give up easily. Twice more they found fence lines cut, allowing Xavier cattle to wander onto Circle H land, where Holden's men would find them and demand payment for their return. A small stream that provided water to the southern pasture was dammed upstream on Holden's property, reducing it to a trickle. And rumors began circulating in town that the Xavier Ranch was in financial trouble, false rumors that nonetheless made some merchants hesitant to extend credit. Through it all, Yates maintained his composure, addressing each problem methodically and documenting every incident. But Vivian could see the toll it was taking on him, the worry lines deepening around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders when he returned from another long day of dealing with Holden's sabotage. One evening in early August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a daily ritual that not even Holden's harassment could disrupt, Vivian broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Yates," she said softly, "what if we did sell the ranch?" He turned to her, surprise evident in his face. "You can't be serious." "Not to Holden," she clarified quickly. "Never to him. But perhaps we could find another buyer, someone who would give us a fair price. We could start over somewhere else, away from Holden's influence." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "This land is part of me now, Vivian," he finally said. "I've put everything I have into it, every dollar, every drop of sweat. To walk away would be like cutting out a piece of my soul." The depth of feeling in his voice moved her. "I understand," she said, taking his hand. "And I won't suggest it again. This is our home and we'll defend it." He squeezed her hand gratefully. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "running from bullies like Holden only encourages them. If we sold and moved, he'd just set his sights on the next small rancher who stood in his way." Vivian nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "Then we stand our ground. We do." He leaned over to kiss her gently. "Together." The kiss deepened, and thoughts of Holden and his threats receded as they retreated inside to the privacy of their bedroom. Their lovemaking that night had an edge of desperation to it, as if both needed the physical reaffirmation of their bond in the face of external threats. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Yates traced patterns on Vivian's bare shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful, "about the future, our future." "What about it?" Vivian asked, pressing closer to his warmth. "I want to build a bigger house. Not right away, we need to weather this trouble with Holden first, but soon, a proper home with more rooms." He hesitated, then added, "For children." A warmth spread through Vivian at his words. They had discussed children in general terms before their marriage, both agreeing they wanted a family someday. But this was the first concrete mention of planning for that future. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible, Vivian," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I sent that advertisement, I was hoping for a companion, someone to share the work and the days. I never expected to find someone who would become my whole world." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "Oh, Yates, I feel the same way. When I sat on those steps that first day, too afraid to enter, I never imagined I could find such happiness here." "We'll get through this trouble with Holden," he promised. "And then we'll build that future together." It was a promise that sustained them through the difficult weeks that followed. Holden's harassment continued: more cut fences, more diverted water, more rumors in town. But the Xaviers weathered each incident, repairing the damage, documenting the evidence, and growing closer through the shared adversity. And then, in late August, the situation came to a head in a way none of them had anticipated. Charlie rode in at dawn, his horse lathered and his face grim. "Boss," he called as Yates emerged from the house. "The north pasture's on fire." Yates's face went pale. The north pasture contained not only their best grazing land but also the hay they had been cutting and storing for winter feed. If the fire spread, they could lose everything. "Saddle my horse," Yates ordered, already turning back to the house to grab his coat. "And get Hank." Vivian met him at the door, having heard Charlie's news. "Holden?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Has to be. The grass is too green to catch fire naturally, even with the August heat." Yates's eyes were hard with anger. "This time he's gone too far." "Be careful," Vivian urged, fear clutching at her heart. "Fire is unpredictable." "I will." He kissed her quickly, then headed for the barn where Charlie had his horse ready. The three men rode off, and Vivian was left to wait, her worry growing with each passing hour. From the house, she could see smoke rising over the ridge to the north, not the thick, black plume of an out-of-control blaze, but a steady stream that suggested the fire was burning steadily. She kept busy with household tasks, but her mind remained on the fire and on Yates. Would they be able to contain it? And what would happen when they confronted Holden, as they surely would once the immediate danger was past? It was mid-afternoon when she heard horses approaching, more than three, by the sound of it. Hurrying to the window, she saw a sight that sent her heart racing. Yates, Charlie, and Hank returning, accompanied by Sheriff Davis and his deputy. And between them, his hands bound before him, rode Victor Holden. Vivian rushed outside as they dismounted. Yates's face and clothes were smudged with soot, and he looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. "The fire?" she asked anxiously. "Under control," he assured her. "We managed to contain it to the northeast corner of the pasture, lost some hay, but the damage could have been much worse." Sheriff Davis, a stocky man with a gray-streaked beard, approached, tipping his hat to Vivian. "Mrs. Xavier, wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "Sheriff," she acknowledged. "What happened?" "Your husband caught Mr. Holden red-handed, so to speak. Seems he was inspecting his handiwork, making sure the fire spread the way he wanted. Didn't expect to find your men already there fighting the blaze." Holden, still mounted and flanked by the deputy, glared at them. "This is a mistake," he insisted. "I was simply riding my property line when I spotted the fire. I was coming to offer assistance." "Your property line is 2 miles east of where we found you," Yates said coldly. "And you were carrying this." He held up a glass bottle containing an oily liquid kerosene. Vivian guessed. "Circumstantial," Holden scoffed. "That proves nothing." "Maybe not on its own," Sheriff Davis agreed. "But combined with the testimony of 3 witnesses and the evidence of previous harassment that Mr. Xavier has documented, it's enough to hold you for arson and attempted property destruction." He turned to Yates. "I'll need you and your men to come into town tomorrow to give formal statements." "We'll be there," Yates promised. The sheriff nodded, then remounted his horse. "Let's go, Holden, you've got some explaining to do." As the lawmen rode off with their prisoner, Vivian let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Is it over?" she asked Yates. "Not entirely," he admitted. "Holden has friends in high places. He might wiggle out of the charges, but he's been exposed now. The whole town will know what he tried to do, and that counts for something out here." It wasn't the clean resolution Vivian had hoped for, but she understood that frontier justice was often more complicated than the black and white morality of Eastern courts. "What happens now?" she asked. "We rebuild what was damaged. We stay vigilant in case Holden or his men try anything else. And we go on living our lives." Yates pulled her into his arms, heedless of the soot on his clothing. "We don't let men like Holden define us or change our plans." In the days that followed, the Xavier Ranch received an unexpected outpouring of support from the community. Neighbors rode over to help repair the fire damage and replace the lost hay. Mrs. Whittaker organized a collection among the town merchants to offset some of the costs, and Sheriff Davis, true to his word, kept Holden in jail pending a hearing before the circuit judge. The solidarity strengthened Vivian's already growing attachment to Golden. This was what Ursula had meant about frontier communities when trouble struck. People pulled together, recognizing that survival depended on mutual support. 2 weeks after the fire, Vivian made a discovery that changed everything. She had been feeling unusually tired and occasionally queasy in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to the stress of the Holden situation, but as the symptoms persisted, a different explanation began to form in her mind. Ursula, visiting for tea one afternoon, confirmed her suspicions. "When was your last monthly?" She asked bluntly after observing Vivian's pallor and the way she pushed away the cake Ursula had brought. Vivian calculated, then looked up with wide eyes. 6 weeks ago, at least, and the nausea is worst in the morning." Vivian nodded. Ursula grinned. "Well, Mrs. Xavier, unless I miss my guess, you're going to have a very interesting announcement for your husband soon." That evening, after supper, as they sat in their customary spots on the porch watching the sunset, Vivian gathered her courage. "Yates," she said, her voice slightly tremulous with excitement and nervousness, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, a question in his eyes. "What is it?" I'm fairly certain." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, our baby." The transformation of his expression was something Vivian would remember for the rest of her life. Initial shock gave way to wonder, then to a joy so pure and unguarded that it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "We're going to have a child." Vivian nodded, her own smile tremulous with emotion. "In the spring, I think, March or April." Yates moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. "Vivian," he said, his voice thick, "you've made me the happiest man in Colorado." Then he was gathering her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, with the mountain sunset painting the sky behind them and new life growing within her, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey, from the desperate decision to answer a stranger's advertisement to those terrified moments sitting on the porch steps, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. As Vivian's body changed, growing round with the child within, Yates's protectiveness intensified. He insisted on hiring a local girl, Betsy Wilson, to help with the heavier household chores, and he moved their bedroom downstairs to spare Vivian the climb. The Holden situation resolved itself more favorably than they had dared to hope. The circuit judge, unswayed by Holden's connections, sentenced him to a year in the territorial prison for arson and attempted property destruction. It wasn't as long as the crime perhaps deserved, but it gave the Xaviers breathing room to strengthen their position. With Holden temporarily removed, his ranch fell into the hands of his foreman, a practical man more interested in running a profitable operation than pursuing his employer's vendetta. Winter descended on Colorado, blanketing the ranch in snow and bringing shorter days and longer nights. Yates began work on furniture for the baby: a cradle, a small chest for clothes, a rocking chair for Vivian to use during feedings. He worked in the evenings by the fire, his hands steady and sure as they shaped the pine wood into functional, beautifully simple pieces. "You never told me you were a craftsman," Vivian remarked one evening as she watched him sand the cradle to a smooth finish. "Not by training," Yates admitted, "but my father taught me the basics, and I've picked up skills over the years. Every rancher needs to be handy with tools." "You're more than handy," Vivian said, admiring the perfect curves of the cradle's rockers. "These pieces will be heirlooms." "That's the idea." Yates smiled, a soft expression that appeared more and more frequently as the baby's arrival approached. "Something to pass down to our children and their children after them." The casual mention of multiple children made Vivian's heart swell. Despite the challenges they had faced, or perhaps because of them, their bond had deepened into something neither had quite expected when they entered their arrangement. What had begun as a practical partnership based on mutual need had blossomed into genuine love, steady and enduring, like the mountains that framed their home. Spring arrived early that year, with March bringing surprisingly mild temperatures and the first green shoots pushing through the soil in Vivian's garden. Her time was close now, her body unwieldy but strong. Dr. Warren visited weekly, assuring them that everything progressed normally. First babies often take their time, he told Vivian during one such visit. Try not to worry if you go past your expected date, but the baby, like its mother, proved punctual. On the first day of April, just as dawn was breaking over the mountains, Vivian awoke to the first contractions. By midday, Yates had fetched both Dr. Warren and Ursula, who had promised to assist with the birth. The labor was long and difficult. Vivian drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, encouraged by Ursula's steady presence and the knowledge that Yates waited anxiously in the main room, probably wearing a path in the floor with his pacing. As the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ranch, Samuel James Xavier entered the world with a robust cry that instantly endeared him to everyone present. He was a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair like his father's and clear green eyes that, Ursula insisted, were the exact shade of Vivian's. When Yates was finally allowed in to see his wife and son, the expression on his face was one of such profound emotion that Vivian felt tears spring to her eyes. "Meet your son," she said softly, tilting the bundle in her arms so Yates could see the tiny face. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. With gentle hands he touched the baby's cheek, marveling at the softness of the skin. "Hello, Samuel, I'm your father." The simple introduction, spoken with such tenderness, broke something open in Vivian's heart. This was what she had traveled across the country for, what she had been afraid to hope for that day on the porch steps, not just security or companionship, but this. A family, a home, a love that grew stronger with each shared experience. "I love you," she said, the words flowing naturally now where once they had seemed so difficult to speak. "Both of you so much." Yates leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle touch that conveyed more than words ever could. "And I love you, Vivian Xavier, more than I ever thought possible." In the years that followed, the Xavier Ranch prospered. With Victor Holden's influence diminished after his prison term, Yates was able to expand his operations, buying additional land and increasing his herd. The original house was enlarged, with new rooms added for the growing family. Samuel was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and then by another brother, David, the year after that. Vivian's garden became famous throughout the county, producing vegetables and flowers in abundance. She began to experiment with canning and preserving, developing recipes that won ribbons at the county fair and were sought after by townspeople. What had started as a necessity providing for her family became a source of personal pride and accomplishment. On the 10th anniversary of Vivian's arrival in Golden, they hosted a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors gathered to share food and music, to admire the thriving homestead, and to witness the renewal of wedding vows between a couple whose unusual beginning had blossomed into one of the most respected marriages in the community. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Yates drew Vivian away from the festivities for a moment alone. They walked to the front of the house, to the porch steps where she had sat that first day, too afraid to enter. "You ever think about it?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "That day, often," Vivian admitted. "How terrified I was, how close I came to running back to the stagecoach. I'm eternally grateful you didn't." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "That moment, seeing you there, knowing how much courage it took for you to come all this way, it changed everything for me." "For me as well," Vivian said softly. "When you said step inside, you belong, it was as if you saw straight into my heart, as if you knew exactly what I needed to hear." "I meant every word." Yates pulled her closer. "You did belong here, Vivian, you still do, you always will." Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued, children's laughter, music, the murmur of friendly conversation. Their life together, built day by day through hard work, mutual respect, and growing love. A life that had started with a desperate gamble, with a mail-order bride afraid to step over the threshold, and a lonely rancher who had found the words to welcome her home. "We should get back to our guests," Vivian said after a moment, though she made no move to leave the circle of his arms. "In a minute," Yates replied, bending to kiss her. It was a kiss that held all the familiarity of their years together, but also the promise of adventures yet to come. "I just wanted a moment to remember where it all began." Hand in hand, they returned to the celebration, to the life they had built together, a life far richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to imagine on that fateful April day, when a frightened young woman from Philadelphia had gathered her courage and stepped into her future in the Colorado wilderness.